Hey everyone, it's Brian here, and welcome to the Mental Musician Podcast, a podcast all about breaking the mental health stigma in the music industry by sharing stories about the very real struggles that most musicians go through when they get off the music stage. Today I have two guests on the show for the first time. One is Michael Wright, a bass guitar guru and teacher from the UK, returning for his third appearance, and you'll hear in the episode that I joke about how he's got nothing else better to do, that's why he comes back so often. But don't worry, we're good mates, and between us we are single-handedly improving the relations between England and Australia. And my second guest, coming on for the first time, is the CEO and founder of The Space Between, an organisation that focuses on building a holistic approach to mental health support for artists to give them the best chance to pursue a music career without sacrificing their mental health. Now, not only are Michelle and Michael two people who care deeply about ensuring young artists and musicians are given proper support, but they have experienced their fair share of mental health struggles and are not afraid to open up and be vulnerable about them. Over the last 12 months, they've become good friends of mine, and their support means so much to me. They've helped me launch this podcast amongst many things, and I've always felt confident talking to them and opening up to them about my own struggles with depression and anxiety. So just like the first few episodes, you're going to hear a lot of interesting stories both from Michael and Michelle about their experiences working as professionals in the music industry. There's going to be a lot of shit talking, mainly from me, but more importantly, I hope that after listening to today's episode, you realize that you're not alone in your struggles. There are people like you out there who have found ways to get through despite their struggles. And after listening to this, I hope that you realize that you have a lot more strength and courage than you think. And if you did find today's episode helpful, as we are a very new show, I'd really appreciate it if you'd shared today's episode with a friend or someone you know who's really struggling at the moment. It really does help grow the show and reach as many artists and people as possible. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Michael and Michelle. I hope you enjoy this one. Good to see you, even though we've been talking for the last half hour, but for anyone listening, they don't know that, and they don't have to know that. As far as I know, you two are strangers, and Michelle, you are an unwilling participant. Blink twice if you need help.
Right. One.
But I appreciate you both being here, and this means a lot to me because I know that both of you care deeply about mental health awareness, not just for musicians and artists, but just in general as well. I'm lucky enough that I'm growing up in an era where I guess mental health awareness is a little bit stronger than it was in previous generations. The fact that both of you have been so willing to jump on board with my crusade, let's call it a crusade. It doesn't matter what generation. There are people from previous generations, cross generations, who are willing to try to make big changes for the future. So, but right off the bat, we got a new guest here today. Michael has returned for the umpteenth time. He's been here for the first couple of episodes of this pod. And this time we have Michelle from The Space Between. And it kind of feels that way because, Michael, you're from the UK, I'm from Australia. And Michelle, you're from the wonderful country we call the US of A, or America, of just America. So how are you, Michelle?
I'm good, thank you. And just as a disclaimer, yes, I am American by birth, however, live in the UK. So, who am I really?
There we go. Who knows where you actually are? You know, you could be
Right.
right next to Michael right now in the other room, and he doesn't know.
I could be.
Just look
I mean, we
around,
started
Michael.
out
Just
speaking about horror movies, so I could be a stalker.
if we need some context, we were talking about Silence of the Lambs and different versions of Hannibal Lecter. So let's just keep an eye out for things and talk about what we want to have for dinner when we all officially catch up in person for our live podcast in the future. How are you, Michael?
I'm good. I'm just wary not to say Candyman 5 times just in case it popped out. So yeah, that's the I'm really like, yeah, I'm super aware that I'm in a room. Potentially Michelle might be near me. I don't know, but I'm in a room by myself. It is currently 9:30 at night. It is very dark. There is nothing around me, so there's a possibility I could be spooked. But other than that, I'm good. I'm very good, Brian, and lovely to be on this show. It really is. It's lovely to be here with you too.
It's always good to see you. I've said that 3 times. That
You
means
don't
I
mean it
mean
this time,
it.
do you? Like you've done it after the fourth time. You're like, oh God, I have to say it again. Oh, lovely to see you. Yeah, I get it. It's fine, Brian. It's fine. It's fine.
Uh, but just for context, for the 400,000 people who will be listening, all of us have been involved in music or musicians or working in the music industry to some capacity. Michael and Michelle a lot longer than I have, and that's why I brought them on here because they know more than me and they make me look good as well. And the accents as well. It's just good to have different accents on. I might bring a Lithuanian on next time just to mix it up. Do you know anyone from
The obvious
Lithuania?
choice, Lithuanian, I mean.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I was like, yeah, of all the other choices, Lithuanian, that's the one.
Hmm. It's good to have a laugh, and I try to keep it lighthearted and have a laugh. Obviously, there are certain jokes that can't make the final cut, so that's why I have Patreon and a paid subscription. If you want the raw material, we call this raw mental musician. But no, try to keep it light and tell a few jokes because anytime you talk about mental health. We may dive into some conversations of suicide. So if anyone's watching or listening and you feel like you're not ready to talk about that or listen to that, come back another day. Um, but if you're still here, appreciate it. And I guess we're here to share our stories. And I'd love to hear Michelle and Michael, about your experiences with mental health, specifically in your music careers, and also share your opinions on how you see mental health awareness now, and also when you're growing up and how it may have impacted you throughout your careers and life as well. And just to, I guess this is not a disclaimer or could just be something to make this a safe space. Any opinion, anything we share, it's on the table because everyone's experience is different when it comes to how we deal with our mental health. It's a very difficult topic still to talk about. There's no cure or solution to how we address it, but I believe that if we just start talking about it, particularly on the ground level, like we're trying to do now, it just gets the conversation going. It makes it normal to talk about. None of us, or at least for me, we're not experts. We're not academics. We're not going to list all these statistics and just say, okay, this is policy number one, policy number two. This is what the research shows. Yeah, we might address it, but for us, it's sharing real stories, real experiences from ourselves or people we know, so that anyone listening, hopefully you feel like, oh, these are real people who have gone through something that is similar to me. So if they've found a way to get through it or managed it or overcome it, maybe I can as well. So that's the feeling. Hope you guys feel the same way as well. I mean, if you didn't, you wouldn't be here.
Yes. Exactly, exactly. And I think that you make a great point because about so I'm not an academic either. I do work in alternative therapies if you want healing. Excuse me. But I'm not a licensed therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, psychotherapist. I'm none of those things. And and I don't know that for this conversation, I mean, I don't believe that it's necessary for any of us to be those things because we're not trying to have a therapeutic session with someone apart maybe the byproduct of a conversation can be therapeutic because it's relatable. You don't feel so alone because you hear somebody else's experiences. And sometimes for me, when people start to cite what this study says or that research says, and it becomes so clinical, it almost takes the human out of it. And I shut down a little bit to that sometimes because if we're just citing what the research says and everybody's faceless and nameless,
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's almost I wouldn't say maybe a misnomer, but when you start to throw the science and the data behind uh, such a thing as mental health, mental illness, and how that ties with oneself as an artist, as a musician. But it's more to the point that we're sharing something which hopefully our listeners can relate to, and at least have a voice or have voices to echo what people might be feeling inside, but just haven't heard that outlet. I certainly, when I was more active when I was a musician, I would love to have a show like this where I would have had three people talking about these things, because it would have made me feel less alone, and it would have made me feel like there are other people out there who have traveled a similar road, but they're further ahead and they can see ahead and they can kind of almost warn people, watch out for that, watch out for this. I think it would be hopefully be really beneficial for everyone listening.
Yeah,
Agreed.
definitely. And things are changing for the better. We're still in the early days of trying to understand the different aspects of mental health, emotional, psychological health, and I think it's only going to hopefully get better. So I might start with you, Michelle, if that's okay. Yeah, please come on
Yep.
down to the hot seat. There's no money at stake, unfortunately. So I will have to remunerate. Let's I've lost my words. It's
think
it's
I think we need to
Friday.
put the batteries back in.
Right.
Okay, I am definitely feeling the Fridays. Whatever that means, I don't know. Anyways, so I'd like to start off by asking both of you a fairly general question, but why do you think musicians historically, traditionally, just don't take care of themselves? Both their mental health, physical health, relationships. And Michelle, I know you work directly coaching musicians and artists, not just musicians, but artists in general. But in your experience in coaching and your life as well, why do you think musicians just don't take care of themselves traditionally?
So I think that, well, it's a very layered answer to that question, I think. And a lot of it, I believe, can stem from one, if the desire to create from an early age is not validated, right? Like it's the thing that you really want to do. And if you're kind of told, like maybe you should get a real job, think about like going to do some real schooling, sort of something. And that, if that's your experience, I think that that can plant a very early seed of there's something wrong with me because of what I want to do, right? And if you begin early on in life with that idea already in your head, that may lead you down the road to not valuing yourself as much as you could have otherwise. So again, it's kind of layered. That can be the beginning of it. Also, now as we had this bit of our conversation about how we're not going to cite data because we're not clinicians and whatnot. I won't give statistics, but I will actually speak to the facts that there is a clinical predisposition in creatives that does lead them can lead them to, mental ill health. That is something literally with the wiring, and now I wish I could actually give you a direct quote that I saw last night, but literally speaking about the wiring that allows one to be a creative or facilitates creativity is actually the same thing that can contribute to the mental ill health, right? So they can go hand in hand, which may then also lead one to not taking the best care of oneself. If you're not sort of aware of that, um, then you just think that the existence that you're living is normal. Whatever's happening in your head is like this isn't everybody's experience. So that's where I would start that conversation with those 2 points.
Yeah, that's something I can relate to, and I know, I'm sure, and I'll speak on your behalf, Michael. Of course,
Thanks.
I feel like I feel like you can relate to as well. Where, at least in my experience, before I decided to become a professional musician, music was one of the few things that I could say that this is something I can do, and I can play the guitar at least better than my peers, or I felt like I could play it better than my peers. Yeah, anything school related, if it was math, English, um, yeah, any schoolwork, it was always heavy competition and predominantly the same. You're doing standardized curriculums and standardized tests, whereas playing the guitar or playing any musical instrument, at least, for me, I felt the guitar was like this. I could be as myself as possible. Um, so perhaps that was trying to hide something or compensate for something. Ironically, every time you make a mistake on the instrument, it feels like there's your life right in front of your face. If I stuff up the song, if I can't perfect the song, then automatically my life is a failure. I am a failure. If I'm not good
Mm.
at this, what am I going to be good at? And half of it in my growing up was a product of myself. Like, I believed that I wasn't good enough in quite a few aspects of life, but also listening to a lot of fellow artists, musicians, and you go on YouTube, listen to my heroes. A lot of them will say that they felt inadequate. They felt like they were never good enough. So I think when you're growing up and you hear your heroes say that, you feel like, oh, yeah, I should feel that as well. So if I am not perfect, if I don't perform and wow people, then I'm not good enough. And it's so hard to, it was so hard to disconnect between being a musician and just being a person. You know, you do well in other aspects of life. If you do well in school, I know there are confidence issues in schools, but if you do well in an exam, for example, you can say, "Hey, I'm proud of myself." Whereas with music, even if you gave a good show at school or played a song well, conquered you feel like you mastered a song that was very difficult, it's almost as if you go, well, thank God I play that well, because gee whiz, if I didn't, then what else do I have? But Michael, I'd love to hear your experience with that as well, and if you could share, is that something that you felt growing up, whether it was with yourself or with your peers?
Not at school. Not it started at when I went to conservatoire. That was when the pressure started and the awareness that um my success, potential success as a musician really depends on me nailing giant steps or me nailing moose to mooch at like 230 beats per minute. Um, prior to prior to conservatoire, I in fact, if anything, I think there was probably a golden era period of my musical education because I'm self-taught, mainly, well, self-taught up until I went to music college. But even when I went to music college, I still I didn't have any lessons on the bass guitar. I just literally took it and kind of figured it all out. And that was kind of the golden period because there wasn't any pressure, and I never felt pressure. I never felt the problems of making mistakes. And I up until about 18, I played quite a lot of gigs, traveled around the area where I lived in. Even up until that point, maybe about 19, started to do some gigs in London with various bands. I never felt pressure. I never felt this sense that I've got to make it happen. Um, in terms of the music, my mental health, on the other hand, yes, that started around about the time I moved to London, about 19. But during school, no, that was I felt almost I almost didn't, because I didn't really grow up with many musicians in school, so I was often the only guitarist. My first school, I had some musician mates, but when I moved schools, it was only really me, so I kind of was in my own world. It's only when I went to conservatoire and I realized there's competition, and the level had gone up a few notches, from me trying to work out tunes on band in a box, or hastily taking a real book and trying to figure out all of these symbols, to go into a conservatoire with musicians far better than me. I was quite a late bloomer when I went to university. That was when the pressure started, and I realized, okay, I'm a fish out of water here, and I've got a lot of competition. And it's an interesting one. The pressure kind of built over time, and I wasn't really aware of it until probably around about my probably middle of the first year. And I was playing. We were playing a big band performance, and I think it was a Bob Brookmeyer arrangement. And for some reason, my right leg just couldn't stop shaking. I felt like I was Elvis. My leg was literally just like, I was looking at it, and it was going to town. I'm like, what is going on? And luckily, I'm playing upright, so nobody can see it. But the right leg shaking, my right arm, I couldn't control that. And it was an unbelievable experience. And then only after I came back and I've gone, right, now that's pressure. Now I'm starting to feel like, my decision to go and study music now at university level, that's a big deal, because that means if I don't get this right, then that's a massive financial mistake I've made, but also it's a big chunk of my early life.
Yeah, there's a lot of I can I have a similar experience with you, Michael, where this was 2021. I think it was one of my final exams for that semester at the Conservatory in Music. It was very standard. You just play a couple of major scales, scales that you learn when you're 10 years old, you know? And I rock up to, I remember that day, I didn't sleep a wink. I mean, I didn't sleep at all, but I maybe got 2 or 3 hours of sleep. And I remember on the train getting there, I, I couldn't breathe. I felt like, why am I stressing about something that I can do with
Mm.
my eyes closed and just I know it like the alphabet. You know, why am I stressing about this? And part of it, maybe in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, if I stuff this up, I'm I might not necessarily fail the semester, but I got my jazz guitar teacher and the head of jazz there in front of me, staring right at me. These two old middle-aged men just staring right at me, hard-nosed Aussies, and thinking, wow, we probably don't want to pass you because you can't even do this simple basic thing. You know, I had absolutely no reason to think that, but for some reason I'm catastrophizing that. And I get to the hall. It's this beautiful hall. It's quite dark, so it's beautiful from the outside. It's not beautiful when you're sitting there. You feel like the walls are caving in you. So I pick up my guitar and I drop my pick. So that's a bad start. And I'm trying to plug it in as well, and I just can't find the input. That's not an innuendo for anything else in life. And and I felt my hands froze. I started cramping, and I'm thinking, I've never cramped in my hands in my life. What's going on? Am I not working? Not just as a guitar player, but as a human. And I just keep fluffing the first notes. So I could see the collective synchronized sigh in both of my the jazz teacher and the head of jazz, and they say, "All right, Brian, just take a deep breath, try again." So I try again, and this time I drop my guitar. So full marks for that. And after about 12 minutes of this, longest 12 minutes of my life, or 12 seconds, it might have been 12 seconds, they say, "All right, Brian, look, we got a long day ahead. Look, why don't we come back tomorrow? Why don't we come back tomorrow and do this? Get some rest. Go get something to eat." So I'm grateful that they were kind enough and lenient enough to do that. Luckily for me, the next day, the second lockdown, COVID lockdown, was announced, so I didn't have to come back tomorrow. Which, but in saying that, it was 3 months of just anxiety where I was thinking, so now I have to prep again for this exam that I should have completed in 5 minutes. And for the next 3 months, or on the way home, I'm crying uncontrollably on the train. I'm not weeping, but I'm just trying so hard not to break down. and I'm thinking, have I just wasted $30,000 on this? Have I just wasted 15 years of my life trying to do this and trying to prove a point to certain people who said you shouldn't pursue this? Have I disappointed the few people who did back me? That thought really stayed with me for a long time. I've only been able to shake it off maybe after listening to Taylor Swift, but also in the last couple of years going to seeking help. But I guess, Michelle, I want to ask you, when it comes to anxiety or performance anxiety, how do you deal with that yourself, or when you talk to others and try to help them, how do you help them? I don't want to say overcome, because I don't think you can overcome anxiety, but how do you manage that? How do you help them build a sense of calm and realize that all these thoughts, catastrophizing, it's a normal feeling to get nervous, but there are ways to deal with it and to not let those thoughts define them.
Uh, True, and I will so I'll start with my personal experience, which has actually led me to doing what I'm doing now. Um, I started out my path in music started out as an aspiring singer, and I really did love to sing from a very young age, and what I found out, though, is when I started singing for performance, well, there was actually 2 things, and I'm gonna touch on one of them because I think it can bring us around to why you might feel anxious, as a vocalist. I'm not sure if it applies as an instrumentalist, but the voice that I had, although others said I had a really good voice, was not the voice that I wanted to have, for one, right? I sort of wanted to have a kind of bit of a gravelly rocker chick kind of voice. Not that that was the only music that I loved to listen to, but that's how I wanted to sound when I sang, and that is not my voice. I am a soprano. I could sing Barbara Streisand till the cows come home. Yeah, I know I look like her too. Well, moving on. Um, but truly, so I could do, sort of choir and I could have gone down the Broadway route or things like that, and that is not what I wanted to do. So that was one bit of it, but I kept singing anyway. But I had really bad stage fright, so I became a soloist singer because that was the level that I guess my voice was seen to be at, and invariably before I had a solo. So when you were mentioning your leg shaking, for me, it was my lips, which is great when you have to sing. And you're so it's like gives vibrato a whole different sort of meaning. Um, and and I literally had nobody to have this conversation with, right? No voice teacher, choir master. They weren't having the conversation. You just sort of got up there and you did the thing and you sang and you hoped for the best and just the pushing through, right? That
Mm.
was my experience. As Brian has implied a couple of times, I'm a little bit older than he is. But truly, so this would have been, and I'm not offended by it because it's the truth, I am older. Um, so going back to, my school years in the late '70s, early '80s, there was not a conversation about it, and that is actually part of what led me to not perform anymore. I auditioned for some bands, then, so after I graduated from high school in America, auditioned for some bands, but again, I wanted to be in a different type of band than my voice. Could I have been in a wedding sort of band? Absolutely. Not what I wanted to do, and also the stage fright thing. So that's what led me to working behind the scenes in the music industry, or part of it anyway. But because I just had nobody saying, "Here's how you can maybe work through that stage fright that will work good for you."
Mm.
So what I know now, and the message that I'm really trying to put out to people is, one, I think that stage fright, anxiety can always be a thing because irrespective of how no matter how you've perfected what you have done, whether you're a vocalist or instrumentalist or whatever type of artist you are, there will be people who do not care for what you're putting into the world, right? They don't like it. They don't like you, they don't like your hair, they don't like your clothes, whatever it is. So I think, having that conversation and trying to help people understand, there's a bit of where you have to depersonalize it as much as you're able to.
Mm.
It would have been a beneficial conversation for me, right? Thinking about, I'm going to always be judged. It was not about the human that I am, though. And then moving on from there, there are so many different things that can be beneficial now. Just learning breathing techniques, right? That help you bring yourself some calm in the moments that you need it before a performance. Other different sort of somatic kind of exercises that can be done. There are essential oils that can be calming and soothing, just literally the scent of them. So there's really a lot of things that can be done in the moments that we need them. Again, I'm speaking about before a performance to help just through those moments. And then, as we've had conversations about this before, oftentimes once you get on to the stage or whatever the performance is, and you get partway through it, and then you start to calm down, like, right, because you're just focused on what you're doing in the moment. Breathe through those tricky moments, tricky first seconds that feel like 2 years. And once you really get into the performance, then you will naturally start to calm a bit. There's a lot that's difficult, but also easier than it has historically been made out to be when there was no conversation.
I got a question for you both. I just wondered, why has it taken so long? I mean, it's probably just starting now, but why has it taken so long? Why do you think the conversation wasn't happening when we were training, or when we had those moments, Michelle, where you could have had someone to coach you with the breathing, the vagus nerve stuff. What? Why didn't someone go in and say, right, we all suffer with this, don't we? Yeah, we do. Okay, can we just, between us, could we just figure it out? It just baffles my mind that in the music industry and the performance, creative arts, that for so long we've all in many ways suffered with it, but with no one's actually ever gone to lengths to do it. So I'm just curious as to, why do you think that has been the case?
So, for in my opinion, a lot of this stems from the fact that once you actually, not so much in school, for me, or that sort of environment, but when it comes to the actual creative industries themselves, historically, they haven't cared. Is the truth. Produce your art and get on with it. The if you consider, and I keep seeing, for some reason, Judy Garland keeps coming up on my Facebook frequently, like
Mm,
her backstory, right? And it was literally, go on, like, eat some soup once a day because you need to be thin. And when you're exhausted, we're going to give you some pharmaceutical sort of something so that you can turn up and do what we need you to do. And then we're going to give you something else to help you sleep and to calm your nerves, whatever the thing is. But mostly just turn up. And if everything that we do, every suggestion we make, everything that we tell you you have to do absolutely wreaks havoc on you, not our problem, because there's about 400,000 people standing in line behind you wishing they could do what you're doing. So I
mm,
really, truly, for me, that's been a big part of it historically, is that just an absolute lack of concern. The other bit, though, I'm sure there were some who have been concerned historically about artists, but maybe, one, they were more silenced. Again, it was the commodification, but also, if they cared, they maybe didn't have the tools or understanding, or maybe they weren't even in the position where they could say, maybe we should, I don't know, do something for these humans. That's my take on it. I really truly think it's kind of a systemic, ugly thing that has historically gone on.
mm.
Yeah, I think that's gone on for, well, maybe centuries. Maybe if you go back to classical periods, or um, where I also might add, Michelle, and this is probably is a little bit more opinion, but as far as I'm concerned, I think also because a lot of older music or previous generations musicians just didn't know how to. Like they grew up in an era where you kind of just get on with it, and you get up on stage and you ply your trade on stage. You learn on the job, and over a long period of time, they somehow naturally or organically find a way to deal with those things. It was just not part of the thinking. Because I remember one of the first few times I had some sort of stage fright. I didn't have performance anxiety and stage frights and panic attacks until that exam that I did. But anytime I asked my teachers, fellow musicians, older musicians, how they dealt with getting up on stage, the answer would always be something like, oh, you just got to prepare really well. And I know preparation is important. Like, you got to know what you're playing and, practice it to the point that it's second nature. But there was no actual advice on how to deal with what happens when you get up on stage. What happens when you get behind the microphone, even if you're just recording at home? Like, it was all just kind of just do it. I think if I compare it to sport was very similar in that sense, where athletes would kind of just work it out on the big stage. So the way that I found a way that seemed to work for me, where the first thing I realized is I got to find a way to take the pressure off. To whether it's if I'm performing at school, you know, I'm not performing in front of 1,500 people, and I'm not performing for these people. I'm performing with them in a way. I want to have fun with it. And when I say this out loud, it sounds really weird, but I get it. Where when you're performing on stage in any genre or any style, any setting, I feel like it should be fun. And I know this sounds so cliche and so cheesy, but if you're not having fun and not enjoying it, of course you're going to shit your pants. Maybe literally. I didn't do that. But so it took me until the very last term semester of year 12, 12th grade to finally work out that instead of one thing that I used to do at my school was whenever there was a performance, we'd sit up on stage and the teacher would just be yapping on about the newsletters and this is what's happening this week with year 7 camp. It's like, all right, so next up we have Brian performing. He's going to perform on the guitar. All right, come on down. Clap, clap, clap. For the next 18 minutes, they're just yapping on. All right, before we start, I'm going to tell you about what's happening for the next 5 years at school. And I just sitting there going, fuck's sake, miss, can you hurry up? So I worked out finally in my last year of school that I won't come on down. I'm going to sit either behind the curtains or at the front row. And everyone will be confused because the teacher will say, come on down, Brian, and Brian's not there. But I'm going to sit there, and then the moment they're done, I'll walk up on stage, I'll plug in, and straight away I play. And it seemed to work. I went, why didn't I do this? I wasn't taught that, I wasn't taught that. And I think I may have picked up the idea from my biggest guitar hero, Tommy Emmanuel, who when I saw him live, he just plugged in, bang, straight away into the show. And he'd always started with a big song, like just, a 12-bar blues and guitar boogie. And he's having so much fun. So I went, why don't I try to do something like that? Instead of starting off with a ballad or a beautiful piece, why don't I start off with something that's exciting and fun? Get all the nervous energy out. It seemed to work. But back to your original question, Michael, yeah, I get the feeling that musicians from previous generations just didn't know how to. And if they did, battle severe anxiety, performance anxiety, or had underlying anxiety issues, they sort of just repressed it as much as they could and put the art ahead of their health or what was going on personally. You have people like Tom Lord, is it from Radiohead?
Tom York, yeah.
Tom York, sorry, not Tom Lord. Tom York. Chester Bennington is another one who had stage fright anxiety. I know Eva Cassidy, she really struggled with performance anxiety and she channeled that into her music, but that was her way of doing it. Could her performances been stronger or could she have felt a little bit more ease if she found a way to deal with it without having to work it out on stage? I don't know, maybe. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
It's I it's I liken the performance to teaching in a way, and anyone who's listening who's a teacher will probably understand this, that you're only as good as your last lesson. And I think when you're a musician or a performer, you're only as good as your last performance. And let's say you've had a residency and it hasn't gone so far. You booked to do all week. The first three shows have been poor by one standards, whatever you hold yourself up to. Um, I think a lot of the anxiety comes from the mind's propensity to revert back to what it knows as a defense mechanism. So if you had a really bad show and you go up on stage and you can do, obviously prepare as much as you can. If you're really having a bad time of it, and like you say, Brian, if you got to enjoy it, but if you're not enjoying it, then I think that anxiety creeps in. If you have a good run of shows, then I think the confidence naturally flows and it's a little bit more easier. When you get more seasoned and when you get more experienced, then I think you learn to ride those ebbs and flows and you can kind of almost channel that space that you need to get into. And that's certainly the same for teaching as well. When you have a bad period, you kind of go within your toolbox to essentially mask and get through it, and then eventually you'll kind of find your way out, and then it'll be there. I mean, I have a digressing slightly. I run a community choir here, and the last two choir sessions, again from my perspective, I don't think they were great because I'd been focused on loads of things, and I just hadn't had to. I couldn't give as much mental energy as I could to the choir and the preparation, and along with my dyslexia and ADHD, which when anxiety kicks in, then that's when I become like way more. Um, I was having a really rough time in myself with the choir sessions. Really, really rough. But it's only this week, after about a week's absence, I came back in, and before I had that um, stage fright. I had really, really bad anxiety, and I had all these floods of negative emotions and kind of negative experiences and memories that were kind of just all at once. It was quite overwhelming. But using kind of Michelle's mentioned about the kind of the breathing, there's a vagus nerve exercise or two that I do. And then I just kind of walked in and I went, right, let's just do the job. And then as soon as the choir came in, we're learning a La La Land medley. Started the first one, and then all of a sudden, everything just went away because I just got this sense that it will be fine. It won't be because there might be a few things, but it'll be fine. So the confidence was grown from that session, and and I liken it to performance. When you kind of go through the songs, you go through the numbers, you build a little confidence. There might be a few ones where you're like, "Oh, I made a mistake here, made a mistake there," but it's that building on the platform of confidence, and it breeds confidence. And I think once you can get into that mindset, it's really good, but it's a hard mindset to get into when you're out of it, because when you're out of it and you haven't had much luck, and this venue was cancelled this bit, and that gig last night went really, really poor, or whatever it is, it just that negative feedback, a cycle of negative feedback does play a massive role in our perception of what we do. So I think it's a mixture of experience, but it's also just, yeah, I think it's hard. It's you work, performers. I think people realize when they're on stage or they're in the studio or they're writing or they're creating, it's work. You're firing both left and right brain. You're absolutely giving your all. On top of that, as Brian kind of alluded to earlier on, shall I say, sorry, reputation, because you put everything on the line, and then it's like you hit send or off you go. This is the demo for A&R, whatever it is. Everything's on the line. So, gosh, it's no wonder why. I know, mentioned, Michelle, that we performers have an inkling, or not an inkling, but we have a kind of predisposition to these things. But on top of the pressures of acceptance,
Yes.
career, and finance, like it's tough. It's such a tough industry, and it's really difficult to explain to people how grueling it can be when you work in the realm of performing.
True. And then on the back of that as well, to me, what I always think about is when you're the literal creator of it, you're the songwriter or you're the painter or the author, and now you're essentially like, "Here's my heart and soul on a plate for you." And again, there's going to be people who absolutely hate it, and it's sort of like saying, "Your puppy is ugly. Oh my god, your baby is ugly," right? Like, because there are things that are that deeply personal and meaningful that you're putting out in the world knowing they will be judged. So, that just it's these things that are inherent to the industry, to life as a creative, right? That
Mm.
he doesn't consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What you said, Michael, earlier about um, you're only as good as your last performance. The one thing that my my music teacher did say to me that somewhat helped me with that um, last high school performance was before before that performance. She said to me, "Just because you give 3 bad performances doesn't make you a bad musician." And conversely, just because you give 3 great performances doesn't make you a great musician either. You're only as good as you are over a long period of time. So judge yourself over a long period of time. Now, of course, if you're shit for a long period of time, then then you're justified in your anxiety and your inadequacy. But that's another story for another time.
Whole other
I
story.
know.
Can I I'm sorry,
Yeah.
if I can just 1 second, I think I think this is important to add about the mental health aspect. Creative industries historically, think about the number of artists across types of creative fields that we have lost to alcoholism and addiction, right?
Mhm.
I I promise you that many of them started out as doing a shot or 2 before a performance to calm their nerves. It wasn't always the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Sometimes the gateway was the, "Oh, shit, I just need something to calm my nerves," kind of vibe, right? That then maybe led to the addiction for whatever reasons, emotional, physical, down the road. And so narrow down to the music industry, and I can't give specifics of this, but I will tell you that it I believe this conversation took place 3 years ago, 3 years ago at most. Um, Somebody was invited into a room at a huge multinational record label to interview for for a well-being position that the label had finally decided that they wanted to create in-house. And part of the conversation, a few of the people in the room who have been at the label for a very long time said they've gotten along so far all these years, they artists, without specialist mental health and well-being support. Why do we need to do this now? This is only 3 years ago that this conversation was
Mm.
happening. So, while there may be there is no, there is more awareness of it. That does not mean that everybody actually cares. There's still that element of commodification. They'll figure it out, they'll get through, they'll be fine. If not, they're replaceable. So I that again for me is one of the reasons that I'm banging this drum so loudly when at all possible, uh, because still at the roots of it, there's some not so great things going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing how this conversation has now moved into, we've talked about anxiety, and that's why these conversations are great because initially I thought, okay, we're going to talk about 15 different topics and we're going to just bang them out, and we've addressed this one issue, and it's a very important one as well. But for you, Michelle and Michael, may I start with you, Michelle? What have you done actively to help not yourself but also the people that you work with to um, manage their anxiety or address their anxiety in their life and also in their work as well?
So for myself, what I've come to realize in the last, I don't know how many years now, but maybe even 15 or 20. And part of this is a product of the life that I have lived and sort of what I have been exposed to. So for me, something very key is to deal with things holistically, functionally, meaning it's not anxiety is rarely ever just about the brain, right? We will often just treat it as just the brain. And so looking at the whole human and what do they have going on, it's inherent that if somebody is regularly getting poor quality of sleep, then that can lead to anxiety or that can exacerbate anxiety. The gut-brain axis is now finally being recognized as really truly important for mental health and well-being. That affects your nervous system as well and anxiety, right? So for me, a big part of it, again, is looking at the whole human, really what's going on with every aspect of you and how to try and improve each area of things. Because if if you take an anti-anxiety medication, for example, which I'm not disparaging that, but you're not actually looking at what the root cause of the anxiety may be or root causes may be. So it's great that people like Louis Capaldi can say, I need a break because it's been too much. What I'm hoping happens eventually going forward is that we're able to create the industry and provide support for the artists so that they don't necessarily need to take a break. I understand that touring schedules can be grueling or performance schedules, but what I mean by this is if we ensure that they're getting a proper nutrition, if we're doing the best we can do for sleep. Again, touring can make it very difficult, time zone changes, tour buses, hotel rooms, whatever it is, but doing things to make sure that that is the best that it can possibly be, uh, to really help the person be as healthy as they can be mentally, emotionally, physically. That will then maybe avoid them, however many years into their career, just being wiped out and needing that real break, right? So I'm hoping that we can start to implement more prevention rather than part of what I like to say is that I am trying to help artists avoid the pitfalls of the music industry rather than have to recover from them down the road. So that's sort of my take on that.
What about you,
Michael?
Michael? How do you what are you doing to firstly take pressure off yourself, but also having worked in education for a long time for your students, young musicians who want to pursue a professional career?
Mm, mm. For myself, I think the first thing I started to take the pressure off was trying to help others with various support groups that I was involved in. A really good support group. They're national in the UK. They're called Man Down UK, and I came across them when I moved to the southwest. Partly because I needed to go to a support group, and then I found one which was a fair away from me. And when I mentioned about the possibility of having one set up closer to where I live, they said, "No, but would you like to run the group?" And I went, "Well, I've never facilitated a group before, but um, sure, why not? I mean, if I don't, then perhaps no one will. So let's go for it." So with the help of Mandan, I set that up, and I was very proud of the work I've done with the men that came into my support group, and that even though the group was for them, but it was also really good for me because I got to chat to uh, strangers and got to at first strangers, and then we became quite good friends in terms of the fact that it's weird you're in a room full of people you don't know, but you're there for mental health. As soon as the ice breaks, you've got no qualms about telling the stranger your life story. But it's like when soon as you come to confiding with your friends and family about it, it's like, oh no, I'm not doing that. But people are more than happy to go and tell you about really heavy stuff that happened, you're like, great, I don't know you, but I pretty appreciate you telling me that. So that helped for a while. And I think the biggest thing for me now is um, I look at how manage my mental health and my mental illness in stages. So there was a part where the first part was developing it, then the second part was hiding it and making sure that no one else sees it, and then the third part was complete and utter breakdown. Then the fourth part was maybe I need to talk and share, and then the fifth part now is almost for me is I've got all this knowledge. I really want to do more to help people. So the biggest thing for me that helps me is a appearing on podcasts like this, B, having the chance also to speak to Brian on his show as well and post it on my LinkedIn and say to people, hey, look, we're having this conversation. Please listen, share with someone or share with people that you think might be a benefit. That for me actually provides me a lot of support because I guess in a way, because I've had such a rough time with my mental health, over most of my adult life, I've got all this experience with it, and uh, it sharing it is almost a quite cathartic to me, and it puts me in a position where now I've traveled that road, and I'm a lot further down the road, and I've got a lot more, miles and experience in there. It feels quite natural for me to want to talk about stuff like this because I'm done talking with other people about it because I feel like, I've learned for now, I've learned what I need to learn. I'm definitely not going to hide it and suppress it. So the next thing is almost to look at this experience and go, right, well, I can do something with it. I can do something positive. So that's the thing that I do to take care of my health. In terms of the advice and for my students for their performances or for their career, um, it's pretty much what we've been talking about. It's that background work, not the night before or or just about before they go performing. It's about that month before, like there's a recital coming. So just putting little planting positive seeds in students' minds and just getting them into thinking about the performance and getting them to be aware of the emotions that they're going to be thinking and feeling. It's not going to stop it, of course, because body just takes over and adrenaline kicks in and you're kind of in that hijack mode. But at least guiding, coaching, letting students know what you're experiencing now is fairly normal. It might not be pleasant at times, and it might be really super unpleasant before you go to perform, but there'll be a moment where if you go on stage and you're still nervous and you sing and you hear the round of applause and you've got that little bit of relief, that's good. You like that. For some performers, it might be absolute torture. The fact that they go and they sing and it's an awful experience for them. So I think for supporting students is just constantly talking pre-performance, post-performance. How did you think you did? What were your thoughts when you went up on stage? What were you thinking? What were you analyzing about yourself? Letting them know that you understand what they're going through, and B, are able to help them and be that person that can support and guide them. And then with that help, and hopefully they'll develop a love, and they'll develop that kind of that itch for performing, and they'll look at the nerves and the anxiety, and they can frame them as more of a positive experience, as in this is my body trying to get me into focus mode, so I make sure that I do the job.
No, it's awesome work, Michael. And, you know, when you look at social media, for example, for all the toxicity and negative stuff and plastered perfection that you see, the one thing that I have seen that I think can be used by a lot of younger musicians is maybe vlogging their journeys, right? And before performance or after performance or when they're working on a project, to say, oh, I'm nervous, or I'm feeling crap, or I haven't practiced well, I'm not happy with things, and or maybe they're going through something else. Of course, there's parameters with what you share on social media. But I've seen there's people like, for example, Adam Neely. I think Adam Neely is a great example of this on YouTube. Mary Spender in the UK, where they're a lot more open now about their insecurities, right? They're probably not going to be 100% honest with what they're going through because there's content that is a bit too dark for the tubes, like how I'm a disappointment to my parents. And that's a whole nother, that's why I don't go to support groups, because I go to the wrong one. I go to a support group and go, "Hi, my name's Brian. I'm a disappointment to my parents." And they go, "This is a business meeting." Oh, sorry. I thought we were networking. But anyways,
Right.
but also talking, what I wanted to say to bring it back to what you were saying, Michael, is that, you talking about your anxiety, your struggles, as difficult as it is, that initial hurdle to get it out there, it normalizes it. It makes it real. And I believe that for anyone, not just artists, musicians, and creators, when you hide what you're feeling or what you're going through, firstly, if you're feeling anxious or if you're feeling, a bit down, the more you hide it, the more it starts to become part of your being, and it starts to warp the way that you see the world. And that's something that happened to me, where when I was first diagnosed with depression and anxiety, I didn't want to believe it. I did everything I could to ignore it, to not address it, and eventually it really impacted and warped the way I saw the world. All of a sudden, I was a walking corpse. I was a walking zombie, and everything I saw could be the brightest day in the world, but I still look at the sky and outside with grey tinted glasses. But once you start talking about it, it becomes real. And as tough as it is to get it out initially, once you do, over time you start to feel like, hey, I can find solutions for this, even if they're not there. Just getting it out there. I can guarantee, at least for me, that any time after conversations like this, privately with mates of mine or therapy, every time I walk away from it, go home, I feel just a little bit lighter. I feel like the weight of the world is lifted off my shoulders. And even though that feeling is temporary, I try to remind myself that if I have more conversations like this, if I can find a little bit more willpower to continue talking about it, maybe that feeling will become permanent, you know? So I definitely, one of the things that I hope that everyone can do is find ways to take pressure off yourself. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of classic ways and universal ways, and then there are things that are specific to your life circumstances. Before I wrap up, and excuse me, dearie me, that's before I wrap up, I cough. No, I want to say thank you, Michael and Michelle, for firstly giving up your time. You've given me so much more time than I could have asked for, and the
Sorry,
stories.
we'll bill you. We'll invoice you for the time. Don't you worry.
You're right.
Yes,
Day
of
rates
course.
too. Day rates, not just like
Absolutely.
an hourly.
Yeah, and I want my per diem, I want my rider. It's all don't worry.
Right. I've had to
Well,
walk from that side of my room to this side of my room.
Oh,
That's
you get that.
gee
transportation
whiz,
costs.
gee.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, at the travel rate of that one
How
per
tough
step.
that was.
Yeah.
It's true.
What airline did you go with that, huh? Southwest?
Right. I'm not feeling clever enough to make something witty up right now. Sorry.
What I'd love to do to finish off, guys, this might throw you off and catch you off guard a bit, but that's the whole point. I'm here to shock you. It's the shock value. It's the shock value. Clickbait, rage
Okay,
bait,
Howard Stern.
and
Yeah.
tweed,
Australian Howard
and
Stern.
good bait as well. Yeah, Kathy Bates.
Oh.
So that's a different bait. No, this segment, I'll think of a good name eventually. But let's call it Controversy Corner. I hope that probably is a name that has been used before, but I'm going to patent it. So one thing I'd love to do moving forward not just with this episode, but moving forward with all the conversations I have, is to try to dispel some myths or change old advice that may have been detrimental to the mental health and well-being of musicians from yesteryear, and either adjusting them or replacing them with completely new bits of advice that may be better for the generations and era that we live in now. So, what's one piece of advice or old adage that you just cannot stand anymore? You want to get rid of. You hope will never be used again. Let's cut it. And what would you replace it with? What I'll start with this one, and I think this ties into the whole of just taking pressure of young musicians and musicians as a whole. Um, when you're an aspiring musician and you're starting out, if you're a vocalist, for example, Michelle, the one piece of advice that just really never really sat well with me was when you have teachers with all good intentions saying, all right, I want you to think of the great vocalists, the great singers, and I want you to channel their voice. I want you to be as great as them. I want you to be as great as Nancy Wilson, Judy Garland, or Ella Fitzgerald. As a guitar player, you got to be as good as B.B. King or Keith Richards or Segovia. As nice as it is to be somewhat compared to great musicians, try to tell a 12-year-old that and just say, okay, that's how we're going to mark you. Like, please, I know it's all in good intentions. And if it's done in a lighthearted way, it's like, oh, you sound like B.B. King. Great, fantastic. But if you're teaching a youngster, don't say, okay, B.B. King did this and you got to be as good as that. That is not the marker. I remember the first semester I had of jazz school at the Conservatorium of Music. The first orientation we had, this was March 2021, so after the first COVID lockdown in Sydney. And the head of jazz at the time said, it's so good to see you all here, and I just want to say you guys are carrying the torch of the future generations of jazz musicians, not just in Sydney, but around the world. We're all getting on here. You're going to get the chance to learn with some of the great Australian jazz musicians, but you're carrying the torch for them. And everyone's going, yeah. And I'm sitting next to the only two mid-20-year-olds going, what the fuck? Firstly, what jazz scene in Australia? That was my first thought. Like, there has not been a thriving jazz scene in Australia since the 80s. So that's a bygone era that those guys are still living in. Shout out to all my teachers who I respect. So that's one piece of advice or mindset, whatever you want to call it, that just please scrap it, throw it in the bin. Compare musicians later in their life when they do reach the heights. And even if they do reach the heights of some of the greats, stop comparing, please. I'm going to go on a big rant before now, so please stop me. Who's next?
Do you want to
Michael?
go, Michael, or I can,
Or
whichever?
Michelle?
Thank you. One thing I would get rid of is performative empathy. The notion that when you speak to someone, and I say performative, that it's an act, that they don't really know what to say, but they're going to say some things that vaguely sound like they're being supportive, but they're not, and it just turns into being patronizing. I'd rather people just come up to me and say, I have no idea what you're going through. It sounds awful, actually, and you could be speaking another language. Like, mate, it sounds awful. I can't help you. I cannot help you. I can't give you any advice other than what do you want me to do? Do you want to go for a beer? Do you want to go for a coffee? Do you want to do this? That means much more to me if I'm going through a crisis than it does talking to someone and then having it's probably a British thing, isn't it? More so. I'd imagine US and UK, they're a little bit US and Australia, sorry, they're a bit more direct and they'll be a little bit more honest. But in the UK, it's that curse of being nice. I can't stand it when people. I feel. I guess because being neurodiverse, I'm having to read people because my brain doesn't work the same way as others. So I'm having to kind of read social signals, but I'm also very, very sensitive to people who I feel are being disingenuous. So just cut the BS. You know, don't play sympathetic or empathetic if you're not. Just really honestly, if you're like, I don't want to deal with you today, go away. That's fine. I don't care. I'd rather honesty, and I'd rather people be real and honest. When I share something or say something about my mental health, then put on something where I then have to go, well, I feel like you're being a bit disingenuous there, or I kind of feel like you had to say that because you felt like I needed that. So I'd like to get rid of that. I'd rather people be honest and just be upfront, because that would mean a lot.
I'm glad you're honest about that, Michael. So,
Thank you.
or maybe you're not. Good performance. Did you say
Right.
empathy or some other apathy? Yeah, apathy, right? Apathy, yeah. Apple tree. Michelle, what would you like to see changed? Actually, before we do that, I just thought of the segment name. Let's call it Back in My Day. All right, Michelle.
Oh,
My day was 2005.
Jesus. How old were my children in 2005? Okay.
So what would you like to
Anyway,
change, Michelle?
I would like to change youth today being such smartasses, not respecting their elders. Just kidding.
Thank you.
Right.
And that's a wrap.
I haven't seen. Right. Just kidding. What so something that I have had real issue with, if you will, but mostly from the framework of mindset, which again I was raised a little bit differently with power of positive thinking, if you will, from a very young age. So before it was cool, before it was new age, right, sort of thing. And because of that, I have had a strong dislike for a long time of the trope of the tortured artist, but I'm an artiste. I
Mm,
can't, like, I'm not okay. I shall never be okay. I can only create if I am tortured or starving, right? For me, because that has been, and that is not to say that people aren't going to have their downtimes. It's not, sad stuff isn't going to happen. People aren't going to be depressed. Of course, these things are real. But the idea that to create great art, you must be suffering, you must be tortured, I think that needs to go away, right? And now I'm probably going to get it backwards, but that Kelly Clarkson has said that she, um writing comes more easy to her when she's in a very happy place in her life, which I believe is actually the converse of what most people would say, right? So I'm not saying again that anybody's life has to look a certain way, but if you immediately take on board the way to become successful, the way to be good at doing what I want to do is to be a tortured soul, then haven't you kind of decided that you're not gonna be happy if you're going to attain that success? And you know what I'm going to do? I will actually at some point try to see if I can get to the origins of that being a thing that we've all heard for forever. Um, but truly, I'm trying to work to dispel that, both with so starving artists, let's try and find ways that artists, I said this to both of you, I'm certain, can use their creativity, their love for creating in a way that can actually support them. They can create a viably financial path while they're pursuing their art, if that's what they want to do. But also again, to just stop telling people that they must be tortured artists to be real artists.
mm,
The, I guess the underlying theme or the overall theme that we're talking about is just taking pressure off yourself, knowing that as important as music is, as beautiful as it can be, it is a livelihood, it is a career. It There's more to life than music, and you can't produce and create to the best of your ability music and art that reflects your life in the way that you want to if you're not healthy. You got to be in a good headspace. You got to be physically well, and if you do that, you're a greater chance of living a long life and also having a long career. A lot of the artists we've mentioned, not just on today's show, but the last couple of episodes, not many of them live long lives. And if they did live long lives, well, it wasn't a good life, as far as the public is concerned. So, you know, make sure you take care of yourselves and try to talk about things. It's going to be difficult. Take as much time as you need to talk to someone. Start with someone you trust, and then, eventually seek help, medical help, therapy. These are things that thankfully are being talked about now. There still is a little bit of a stigma, but we're moving towards a generation and an era where yeah, the stigma will become more the latter than the former at the moment. So, any last thoughts before we wrap things up, guys?
So, here, is that the girl from Ipanema?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. I'll let you go to sleep, Michael, and I'll let you be tortured, Michelle.
No, pause. Seriously, soon, like we are gonna do an intervention because Hannibal Lecter, girl from
Yeah.
Ipanema. What
I
is occurring in Brian's
I
mind?
know.
I don't really know.
And
And
he whistled it without the syncopation either. It was just wrong. Just wrong. It was in key. It was in key at least. But yeah.
Oh,
We
I'm
got
a
we got to have a
failure
chat.
now.
There
I'm
it
not
is. No
tortured
matter
enough anymore.
what you do in music, somebody's gonna critique.
Yes.
I
Brian,
think you're crazy. You've got it
disappointed
wrong.
with your whistling, Brian. You're not crazy enough, Brian. You got to work on your whistling chops. You're not. Yeah.
Damn,
Practice
just when I
16
thought
hours
I
a
could
day.
be a musician, a real musician. Damn. Anyways, all right. Thanks so much,
Uh,
Michelle, Michael. Really appreciate it.